Look closely at the musculature of the Great Sphinx, or the seamless transition of bone and sinew in the stone reliefs of Persepolis. Historians tell us these are metaphors, poetic symbols of power born from the fever dreams of a primitive imagination. But there is a disturbing anatomical logic in these carvings that defies the limits of mere artistic license. If these creatures were purely mythical, why did ancient sculptors document the surgical attachment points and the specific vascular systems of hybrid beings with such clinical accuracy? We are taught to view the chimera as a fable, a composite of parts meant to inspire awe or fear. But as our own modern laboratories begin to successfully merge the DNA of disparate species, a darker possibility emerges. We may not be looking at the birth of mythology, but rather the surviving blueprint of a lost biological record, a chapter of high-level genetic engineering that predates our understanding of the double helix by thousands of years. The conflict lies in the silence of the fossil record versus the loud, consistent testimony of global art. From the eagle-headed Apkallu of Sumer to the feathered serpents of the Americas, the theme is universal. These were not localized legends, they were a global standard. Critics argue that if these beings existed, we would find their bones. Yet, the history of our planet is one of erasure. Soft tissue decays, and the remains of biological experiments, especially those that may have been sterile or produced in limited numbers, would likely vanish into the acidic soil of deep time. What remains are the records left by those who saw them. When we look at the Lion Man of Hohenstein-Stadel, a figure carved from mammoth ivory 34,000 years ago, we see more than a creative spark. We see an obsession with the fusion of man and beast that has persisted across every continent and every era of human development. Consider the anatomical impossibility of the centaur. In classical Greek sculpture, the transition from the human torso to the equine barrel is not depicted as a clunky stitch job. Instead, the marble shows a sophisticated integration of two separate respiratory and circulatory systems. The rib cages are not simply stacked. They are merged with a logic that accounts for the massive oxygen requirements of such a creature. Modern biological theorists have puzzled over how such an entity would function. Yet the ancient reliefs often depict these hybrids with specific physical traits, unique muscle insertions and specialized diaphragms that suggest a functioning, albeit engineered, physiology. This raises a haunting question. Did the ancients have a grasp of cross-species compatibility that we are only just beginning to rediscover? This hypothesis suggests that the gods of antiquity were perhaps practitioners of a science we are only now starting to name. The legends of the chimeras often describe them as servants, guardians, or even biological weapons. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Enkidu is described as a wild man, a hybrid of animal and human traits created specifically to rival a king. He is not born, he is fashioned. This language of fashioning or weaving life is found in almost every creation myth, often involving a divine figure who possesses the secret knowledge of the blood. In the 21st century, we are already creating chimeras in the lab, pigs with human hearts, sheep with human livers, all in the name of medical progress. We call this cutting-edge science. We call it the future. But if we can do this today with our relatively young understanding of gene editing, what could a civilization have achieved over centuries of specialized study? The monsters of the ancient world may have been the organoid projects of their day. The Sphinx may not have been a tribute to a pharaoh, but a monument to a breakthrough in biological longevity or environmental adaptation. The lion's body provides the strength and the apex predator's resilience, while the human head provides the intellect. It is the ultimate survival suit, rendered in living flesh. This is not the work of a culture that feared nature, but one that viewed nature as raw material. The consistency of these forms suggests a standardized biological industry, one that operated with a logic we are only now beginning to replicate. There is a specific motif in ancient art known as the Master of Animals. It appears in the Indus Valley, in Egypt, and in Mesopotamia, showing a central human figure physically dominating two symmetrical, often hybridized creatures. Traditional archaeology suggests this represents man's dominance over nature. However, a darker interpretation suggests it represents the geneticist who holds the reins of the biological code. The buckets and pine cones held by the winged beings in Assyrian carvings have long baffled researchers. Some now hypothesize these were not ritualistic objects, but containers for genetic material, the seeds of life, and the tools used to alter the biological data of the subjects before them. These figures do not look like priests, they look like technicians, precisely applying a catalyst to the tree of life. The transition from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic period saw a sudden, unexplained explosion in the domestication of plants and animals. Grains that could not survive in the wild suddenly appeared, perfectly suited for human consumption. Animals were modified to be docile. If we accept that humans were capable of such rapid selective breeding, why is it so difficult to entertain the idea that the same techniques were applied to more complex organisms?
The chimera may have been the pinnacle of this domestication era, a period where life itself was a medium for utility. These beings were designed for specific roles: the winged bull to guard the gates, the hawk-headed man to survey the skies, the serpent to endure the heat of the deep earth. We must also look at the failed experiments. Mythology is riddled with stories of creatures that were wrong. The Medusa, whose very presence was lethal. The Minotaur, who was a cannibalistic mistake hidden away in a labyrinth. These stories read like laboratory journals of genetic instability. A labyrinth is a perfect metaphor for a containment facility designed to isolate a biological anomaly that has become a liability. The fear these creatures elicited wasn't just because of their appearance, but because they represented a violation of the natural order, a biological instability that threatened the purity of the surrounding lineage. They were the glitches in the system, the necrotic tissue of a science that had overreached. The most unsettling evidence is found within our own genome. Recent studies in paleogenetics have revealed that modern humans carry the DNA of ghost populations, hominid groups that we have no fossil record for, but who clearly interbred with our ancestors. We are, by definition, hybrids. If our ancestors were already mixing their genetic code with unknown cousins, how far did they go? The pervasive legends of demigods and heroes with extraordinary physical traits suggest a social hierarchy based on genetic enhancement. The blood of the gods may have been a literal reference to a superior engineered strain of DNA that granted longevity, strength, or cognitive abilities far beyond the baseline human. If these creatures were real, where did the technology go? The hypothesis suggests that such advanced biological mastery is inherently self-limiting. Genetic tampering on a global scale would eventually lead to mutational meltdowns, or the introduction of pathogens that the engineered immune systems could not handle. The very chimeras that were built to be superior might have become the vectors for a mass extinction event, leaving only the pure or primitive strains of humanity to survive and rebuild. All that would remain of the era of biological titans would be the stories told by the survivors, stories that eventually fossilized into myth. We are the descendants of the survivors, looking back at the ruins of a laboratory we no longer recognize. When we walk through the halls of the Louvre or the British Museum, we aren't just looking at art. We are looking at the remnants of a biological great works project that was eventually shuttered by catastrophe. The blank stares of the Sphinx and the frozen gallop of the centaur are not the products of a lack of knowledge, but a record of what happens when the code of life is treated as a playground. The risk of this knowledge is the realization that we are repeating a trajectory we don't fully understand. We are reaching for the same tools, opening the same forbidden books, and calling it innovation. As we look at the strange, beautiful, and often terrifying hybrids in ancient art, we should ask why their forms are so consistent. Why would a culture in South America and a culture in the Mediterranean both dream of the same Birdman? Random imagination usually produces random results.
High-level engineering, however, produces standardized models. These were not ghosts or demons, but a scientific hubris so great it was eventually mistaken for magic. The shadows of the past are populated by these silent witnesses. They stand in our plazas and guard our tombs, stone replicas of entities that may have once breathed, hunted, and bled. They are the giants in the earth, the fallen ones, the hybrids of a forgotten age. Whether they were the result of a lost science or a peak of human creativity that we can no longer reach, they remain one of history's most profound, unanswered questions. We call them monsters because it is safer than calling them predecessors. We relegate them to the realm of unsolved hypothesis because the truth of their existence would force us to redefine what it means to be human in a world where the skin we wear was once a choice, not a destiny. The story of the chimera is not a story of what might be. It is a haunting suggestion of what might have been. As our own science edges closer to the same boundaries, the stone eyes of the Sphinx seem to watch with a weary, knowing gaze. We are not discovering the secrets of life for the first time. We are merely reopening a book that was slammed shut thousands of years ago, hoping that this time we can handle the power of the pen. The myth is the mask that history wears to protect us from a reality we aren't yet ready to face. The reality that the monsters were real, and that we might be the ones who brought them back to life. Every fossil we find, every segment of junk DNA we decode, brings us closer to the realization that the ancient world was far more biological than we ever dared to imagine. The silence of the statues is not a lack of speech, it is a patient waiting. They have seen civilizations rise and fall on the back of these same technologies. They have seen the masters of animals become the victims of their own creations. In the clinical precision of their carvings, there is a warning of the fragility of the human form. If we can be edited, if we can be merged, then what are we? The ancients documented the answer in stone, leaving us a visual catalog of the possibilities. They showed us that the boundary between man and beast is not a wall, but a thin, permeable membrane. And once that membrane is breached, the path back to pure humanity is often lost in the labyrinth of our own making. We stand now at the threshold of a new Neolithic revolution, one where the seeds we plant are not in the soil, but in the cell. We are designing new life forms to solve our problems, just as the gods of old may have done. We create fluorescent fish, goats that produce spider silk, and embryos that are part human, part something else. We tell ourselves we are the first to walk this path, but the stone reliefs of Assyria and the marble of Greece suggest otherwise. They are the mirrors of a past that looks exactly like our future. The dark thriller of our history is not that we were once primitive, but that we were once sophisticated beyond our own survival. The monsters are not coming. They are simply waiting to be remembered.